In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you some very useful Flutter Flow tips that I'm pretty sure you're going to be putting to use in most, if not all of the apps that you're going to be building from now on. And make sure you stay until the very end because I'm going to be sharing with you an awesome tip that is going to help a lot of you to do something that you did not think was possible to do with Flutter Flow. So definitely stay until the end. Now, before we get started, as always, all the apps and all the resources that I cover on this channel are going to be available to view and or clone, as well as get some more content on our amazing Patreon community. And you can learn more and perhaps join our incredible Patreon community via the link in the description below the video. Now, the first tip that I want to share with you has to do with displaying data when the app loads. And so if you need to display some external data, as soon as the app loads, there's a couple of things you need to watch out for. So here I have an app, and as you can see, I have some data here, and this data is loaded immediately. So if I refresh this app, you're going to be seeing this data show up immediately. And this data here is loaded via an API. Okay, so this is not, not data stored in the app. This is external data. In this case, we just have a list of countries and their capitals. Now, many of you know that the way that you do it is by creating an action on this top level here. So as you can see, I have this first page here and I have an action here. And if we check out the action, we have a couple of actions, but you cannot create an action, load the data and display it here. You can't do that because if the page loads before you're able to get the data from some external source, this data is not going to be displayed here. So the correct way to do it is to first fetch the data, store it in the app state or page state if you want, and then display the data from the app state or the page state. So if we take a look at our action flow, we are doing this backend API call, okay, to get the data. And this is what my API call looks like. I'm just using some sample API to get a list of countries. These are my, responses. This is kind of what we're getting here, a list of countries and some data. But I am not displaying this data directly. I am first storing it in app state. So as you can see, I'm doing this update app state, and only then I am displaying the data. And here I am displaying the app state data. And the beautiful thing with this approach is it's always going to work. It's always going to be predictable. You're always going to be seeing this external data. Because what happens here is anytime you're working with app state, you have access to this very powerful functionality here, right? This update type. You can rebuild the current page. You can do no rebuild, or you can rebuild all pages. In this case, you want to select rebuild current page. If you select no rebuild, you're never going to be seeing that data because it's not going to rebuild your app after it gets the data. And in 99.9% of the cases, you're only going to receive the data after the page has loaded, because loading the page is done very quickly, whereas getting the data takes, a couple of seconds, maybe a couple of milliseconds longer. And so you always want to select this, and you always want to be displaying data from app state. Just remember it like this: always displaying data from page state or app state instead of directly from the API call. The next tip that I want to share with you guys is if you're dealing with external data, right? You're pulling data from some external API, which is something that you're going to be doing a lot. You want to make sure that you are loading that data into custom data types, right? So if you take a look at my API call here, my response and test right here, you see I'm parsing this as a data type, and I went ahead and I created this country type here, and this is a list because that is the kind of data that we're getting, right? If I do a test API call, you see this is a list. I'm getting back a JSON, and in most cases you're going to be getting JSON back. And when you see these square brackets, this means that this is a list. And when you see these curly braces here, this is an object here, right? And inside you have another object, and all of this can be represented with these custom data types, right? So if you come over here, as you can see, I have two custom data types. I have this country type, which contains all the fields that we expect to get from that API call. But because we have a nested data type, I went ahead and created another one called country media type that has these three fields: flag, emblem, an orthographic here, and I embedded it in here. And these custom data types are modeling what we're seeing here, right? So as you can see, this is this main object here. We have another object kind of embedded into it called media, and all of this, any kind of JSON, you can represent it using custom data types, and that is exactly what you want to do. Because when you parse your JSON into custom data types that you have defined here in Flutterflow, it becomes a lot easier to kind of work with the data, right? So take a look at this. I have my app state here, and I have countries, which is a list of that country type, right? So I basically created an app state variable, list of country type. And if I go back to my API call here, right? If I come over here to this top level, open this up, I can update app state by setting the value. And what I do is I as data type, I can select as data type, and it automatically parses it into the data type. And that way I can assign it. I can do anything that I want. Just makes it a lot easier to kind of work with that data. And I don't need to worry about JSON paths or any of that at all. And trust me, you don't want to work with JSON paths or any of that. You just want Flutterflow to do the heavy lifting for you. And then when it's time to kind of display the data, I can just come in here and I can do this. I can just do data structure field, because this becomes a complex data type. So always, if you can, if you're working with external data and the data is in JSON format, which is going to be, the majority of situations that you're going to be dealing with, make sure you're parsing that JSON into custom data types. Now, my next tip has to do with data table. So if you take a look at the second page here, we have a data table, which is an amazing widget provided to us for free by Flutterflow. And if we go back to our app, this is the second page, and we're using this data table widget. Now, the thing with data table widgets is that you cannot feed them directly by some external data, right? Because if you take a look at our list view here, you select a list view, you see list view has two options that we can feed it data with, right? So we can feed it with a backend query, and we can feed it by generating dynamic children. But when it comes to this data table, the only option we have is that we need to generate dynamic children. Now, what is the difference between backend query and generating dynamic children? Well, backend query is data that you're fetching externally, okay? So when you specify that a certain list or a data table or something else is going to be filled with data that you're going to be getting via a backend query, that widget needs to wait while it fetches the data so that it can display it. On the other hand, if you are using this generate dynamic children, you already have the data, right? The widget does not need to wait. You already have the data. The data is saved in your app somewhere. Maybe it's app state, or maybe it's a bunch of variables somewhere. You already have the data. Most of the time, it's going to be app state or page state, but it can come from anywhere, but it's going to be already in your app. You're not going to be fetching the data. Now, when it comes to using the data table, the only way that you can feed it with data is via this generate dynamic children. That is the only way. Basically, you already need to have fetched that data before and have that data available to you. And as you can see, if I click here, I have these countries, and my countries is app state, right? So this is not external data. This is data internal to the app. And in many situations, the data that you're going to be fetching or you want to display with this data table, it needs to come from somewhere else. Now, in this case, I already downloaded the data, right? So remember, on this first page, as soon as this page loads, I am fetching the data and I'm saving it to the app state. So if the user sees this first page, which is going to be the case because this is the first page that gets displayed when the app loads, our app state is already filled in with data. But if that was not the case, if you had this page set as the first page, what you need to do is on the top level here, so maybe on the column level, or what you can do is you can wrap this in a container, right? You can just simply wrap it as a container. And on the container level, you can do a backend query. So I can do an API call. I can do something like this, country list. I can say confirm. And then this data table, it's going to have access to whatever I was doing here. And as a result, if I click here, not only do I have access to these countries, this app state, but I also have country list response. And as you can see, this thing is now highlighted, right? If you take a look at this left-hand side, you see that that is now highlighted, okay? And so that's what you need to do when it comes to using a data table, right? If you're going to be using external data, make sure you fetch it as a container or some kind of a parent widget. You can do it at the top level if you want. Make sure that you fetch it beforehand so that this data is available here so that you can generate children from a variable, because there's no way to get this data directly and feed it into your data table in one step. You need two steps when you're using a data table. The next tip that I want to share with you guys is you want to be using cloud functions to do a lot of useful things. When Flutterflow introduced this functionality, a lot of people got very, very excited, but ever since then, it kind of died down. I haven't really heard a lot of people using cloud functions. It's a little bit more complex. It's a little bit more involved, but actually it's very, very easy to get started. And it's also very, very powerful because you can achieve a lot of, amazing things, a lot of, complex things with cloud functions that you probably didn't realize before. So if I click on cloud functions here, as you can see, I have one cloud function here called send email. And this is a cloud function that I did not write myself. I actually used ChatGPT to do it for me. So if I jump back to ChatGPT, you can see my prompt here. Write a Firebase cloud function that uses SendGrid API to send an email. Use the following template. So I went ahead, copied the template, pasted it in here. And as a result, it went ahead and wrote a cloud function that uses a SendGrid API to send emails. And if you're not familiar with SendGrid, SendGrid is an amazing service that allows you to send emails. And so you can simply head over to SendGrid.com, create your free account. And once you do that, you can go into settings, you can click on API keys, and you can create an API key because you need an API key to use SendGrid. And then you can simply insert your API key and you have email sending functionality from this very, very simple cloud function. Next thing you want to do is you want to click on deploy. I already deployed this successfully. And by the way, you do need to connect this app to a Firebase account. And if you click here, you can see that I have this connected to one of my Firebase accounts. After that, you can go back to your UI, click here. And as you can see, I created an email client that I can use to send emails. And when we run our app, we can go to the fourth page here and we can send an email. And so let's say I want to send an email to one of my accounts here. I can just type this. Hey, James, here's an email from Flutterflow. Send email, and it says email sent. And now if I log into my Gmail account, you can see that I have an email. Hey, James, here's an email from Flutterflow. I have the subject set to this, but it's very, very easy to change it as well. And so as a result, simply by creating a very, very simple cloud function, I have very, very powerful functionality. And obviously, you can do a lot of interesting things with cloud functions. You can do a lot of backend tasks that are simply not going to be a good fit for Flutterflow. So anything that you need to do in the background that the user does not need to see or does not need to interact directly with, you want to be using cloud functions. And combined with ChatGPT, it makes creating all kinds of cloud functions a very seamless process. Now, the next tip that I want to share with you guys is something that a lot of people do not think it's possible to do with Flutterflow. Well, I'm here to tell you that it is possible, and this is something you're definitely going to be using. So if you take a look at the navbar, you might notice that it looks a little different from the standard Flutterflow navbar. So if you take a look at my app here, this is the navbar that I have here. And if you take a look at the stock Flutterflow navbar, it looks like this, right? It's similar, but still somewhat different. And why do the navbars look different? And that is because I went ahead and created my own customized navbar. And so this was all created by me. Now, you may be asking at this point, why would you create your own customized navbar? Aren't, the standard Flutterflow navbars good enough? Well, they are good enough, but the problem with Flutterflow's standard built-in navbars is that they're not customizable, right? You cannot change how they look, their appearance, kind of their functionality on the fly. You cannot do anything. But with a customized navbar, you can change exactly how it behaves. So if you take a look at our app here, right, we have a navbar with links to 4 pages, right? So I can click here, and I'm on the second page. I can click here, I'm back on the first page. I can click here, I can go to the third page. I can click here. I can go back to the first page. Okay. Now, let's say that, I'm building an app and I have a user logged in and I don't want this particular user to have access to a certain page, right? Let's say this fourth one, right? This last one is a link to the admin page, right? And this user, because when they logged in, I determined they're a regular user, right? They're not an admin. They're not like a moderator. They're a regular user. So what I want to do is I want this button to not be available. I can also disable this button, but the best approach would be to not make it visible. And that's really easy when you have a custom navbar, because all I can do is click here and I can set conditional visibility. So for example, let's say I put false here. And if I run my app, I am not going to be seeing that button. And that means when the user loads the app, they're not even going to see this button. So they might not even realize that there's actually a hidden page somewhere that is going to give them admin functionality, right? Admin privileges. And as you can see, when I load this app, I now have 3 pages here. Okay, I'm not seeing that last page. And I can go ahead and enable it. So let's say I turn off conditional visibility. That means it's always going to be visible. I restart the app. And now that button should be available. The pages are still there, right? The pages are still there. It's just there is no way to get to that specific page because we have a custom navbar. So how exactly do you do it? Well, it's actually very, very easy to do, right? What you want to do is you want to disable the built-in navbar. So I have the built-in navbar on these pages just to show you how it looks. But on this page here, I don't have the navbar, right? So if I click here, and if I come over here, I don't have show navbar turned on. I don't have anything. So these two are disabled. And the next thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that you have a column, which is going to be the standard configuration, right? When you create a new page, you have a column that hosts various elements. And you want to be thinking about it like this, right? Your column is going to have 2 elements, kind of 2 children elements. The first one is going to be either a list view or like a data table or another column, depending on what you're going to be displaying, or maybe a container. But the second one is going to be a container, then you're going to have a row, and then you have your various icon buttons. Now, very, very important point here, right? Your first child here, right? So in this case, this is a list view. You want to make sure that you have this expansion turned on. You want to set it to expanded, because if you do not, you see, if you select this default option, it's only going to take as much space as it needs to. And so, if this thing has like a couple of items, then it's going to take very, very little space. And you always want to make sure that you have it set to expanded, because the navbar needs to be at the bottom all the time, right? Regardless what happens to your app, regardless if you have a ton of space here, you want to make sure that this first child takes up the whole thing, and you can do that by setting it as expanded here. And for the second child, I have a container, I have a row, then I have various buttons. And here you can customize it however you want. You can, change the colors, you can change the icons, you can change the background color, the foreground color. You can do anything that you want. Rest assured, you're going to be creating a custom navbar that can do pretty much anything that you tell it to. So once you've created the buttons, the next thing that you want to do is you want to link them to the pages. Okay, so this icon button is this first one here. It's obviously not linked to anything, but these other ones are linked to subsequent pages. And I'm using this navigate to page 2. I'm using this, navigate to page 3, etc., etc. This is navigate to page 4. And here I'm using instant navigation so that it's immediate, right? They click on it, it's immediate. And that is something that you want to be using because you don't want to have any kind of animation. You just want them to click on it and just go to that page, because that's how navbar navigations work, really. And so as a result, you have full control over this navbar. You can disable a button. You can hide a button. You can display any kind of buttons you want depending on a certain condition. The point is, now you have full control, because if you go to the standard navbar, well, you can't really do anything, right? So I have this navbar and it automatically links to the other pages, right? But I can't really control it. I mean, I can kind of change the icons here, but I can't display it, right? Because I have these 2 pages that have navbar enabled, right? And as a result, this navbar, it will automatically display the other pages or all the pages that have navbar enabled, right? And that's not configurable at runtime, right? While the app is running, you can't really change it. right? This is the main issue, because a lot of people, they want to build customized apps. They want to, have maybe a nav bar option for admins or moderators. And this is something that we did in some of the other apps that I was building previously, the complex apps. You might have an admin screen or this screen, and regardless, there's tons and tons of use cases for having a custom navbar, right? When you're building an app from scratch using code, well, you have a custom navbar, you can modify it. But with Flutterflow, you don't have that flexibility until now. So now you can get it to do exactly what you want. And I know many of you have been asking about it. Well, now you have it, and you can put it to good use. You can build amazing apps with custom navbar. And I'm sure many of you are going to be doing just that. Now, I'm sure the tips that I have demonstrated in today's video are going to be useful for all kinds of apps. So regardless, if you're building an app in this niche or in that niche, chances are you're going to find some use case for many of the tips, if not all of the tips that I have demonstrated in today's video. But the best way to kind of learn them, study them, and ultimately use them in the apps that you're going to be building is by viewing and cloning this app. Because it's one thing to watch this video and kind of learn it passively, but it's a completely different thing to kind of watch this video and then get access to the code and then actively, get more practice and try different things. That is the best way to learn, and you can do just that when you join our amazing Patreon community. Because when you join our amazing Patreon community, you're not only going to get access to this app right here, you're going to get access to all the apps in all kinds of different niches, simple apps, complex apps, and all kinds of apps in between. So regardless what kind of app that you're looking to build, chances are you're going to find a ton of value by getting access to all the apps that I have built on this channel. But that's not all. When you join our amazing Patreon community, you're also going to get access to extra content such as Q&As, live streams, behind the scenes content, as well as our Patreon supported masterclass, where I do deep dives about a specific tool, app builder, or maybe a concept that the community wants to learn more about. So our community votes on a specific topic, and I create an extensive video that walks you through that specific topic, as well as answer any of the questions that you may have. And above all, when you join our amazing Patreon community, you're going to be supporting this channel and supporting my work, and that is greatly, greatly appreciated. And so if you're looking to level up your no-code knowledge, your no-code game, then you're definitely going to find a ton of useful content inside of our amazing community. And you can join our amazing community via the link below the video.